LEGO Bionicle is one of LEGO's most well-known and respected themes. A LEGO theme that has transcended being just a LEGO theme and has gone into the mainstream consciousness. However, LEGO Bionicle, as you might be able to tell, isn't around today. So, something must have happened to cause LEGO Bionicle to go from a titan and a face of the LEGO company to being just a footnote in LEGO's long history of products. And the story here is quite a bit more interesting, because I want to focus the majority of this video on the Bionicle reboot that was done in 2015 to try to salvage LEGO Bionicle and bring fresh life into the series. However, this remake seemed to have just alienated all of their OG fans and failed to make any new ones. So that's what we're going to do in today's video. We're going to take a deep dive look, a very in-depth look at the entirety of Bionicle G2. But for anyone who isn't aware of Bionicle, I feel like I need to give a quick history lesson so we know how we got to the point of LEGO ending and subsequently rebooting Bionicle. And for that, we have to go all the way back to the late 90s. You see, LEGO was having a very bad time in the late 90s. They barely existed. Trying to capture a new audience to keep their company afloat, they were throwing all sorts of new themes and ideas at the wall. Some of these would be pretty alright to absolutely horrific, like actually horrible. And it was seeming like it was a very hopeless situation LEGO was in, and as a desperate Hail Mary to keep their company alive, they made Bionicle, a sub-theme of Technic, which is kind of forgotten that this started as like a Technic advertisement almost. In 2001, we got introduced to the Toa Mata. Now, the Toa Mata had very little articulation, just with leg and arm rotation with a gear gimmick on the back to move one or both of the arms. Now, these figures, despite being very basic, were still very good for their time and still hold up all these years later. Like, yeah, some of the articulation is definitely missing from the Mata, however, they are still an amazing set of figures. This introduced us to our core cast of characters, with Tahu, Gali, Lua, Kopaka, Anua, and Pohatu. These guys would become the faces of LEGO at this time. Think of them like the modern day ninja of Ninjago, right? Like, these guys were the ninja of the early 2000s. And their legacy would last all the way till today, with them still being referenced in some sets, like with Anua getting what might be his mask in a Monkey Kid set, and Tahu getting a gift with purchase later on in modern times. Later on, in 2002, the Toa would get a Nuva upgrade, giving them some new armor, new masks, new weapons, and sadly no new posability for the most part, being pretty much the standard Toa that we know, but still being a pretty cool and unique upgrade, giving a new visual style to the Toa. And then in 2003, we would get Takanuva, along with some villains like the Roxy and Makuta. The next year, 2004, would renovate the entire system of Bionicle as we knew it, making the Toa far more posable and more playable. This would introduce the Toa Metru along with their villains to the Bionicle cast, finally adding some brand new characters other than just the Mata. Now, these guys would become extremely popular in the Bionicle community and are some of the more popular characters Bionicle ever introduced, being the older, like, retired Toa from earlier sets, these guys were expanded upon and given a lot of love from LEGO. 2005 would be a rough year for Bionicle, as a lot would say. This would introduce the Hordaka, which really simplified a lot of the Toa and made them all look a little goofy, with all the Toa revolving around this like pole, like spinny wheel mechanic. And you know, I actually don't think 2005 was as bad of a year for Bionicle as everyone would say. However, it was the first year that Bionicle did really start to falter a little bit, and interest did wane slightly from other years. 2006 would renovate Bionicle once again, giving it a more darker skin. This would introduce the Toa and Nika, which would have a brand new set of Toa with a even more renovated posability and articulation system. Seriously, these guys are very underrated in the grand scheme of Bionicles, especially with their villain faction, the Paraka, which are just so good. Yeah, some of the posability is a little restricted from other villains like the Roxy. However, I do absolutely love these guys, especially their light up of brain stocks. These guys are so cool, I definitely want to finish collecting them. Plus, we did get some of the best Bionicle sets ever made, with Brutaka and Axon being just absolute legends in the scene. All the way up until this point was the golden age of Bionicle. Even if, like 2005 and even 2006, despite how good it was, even if interest was waning throughout these years, it was by no means dead or dying. Bionicle was still going very strong. It was after this that Bionicle's interest in the public started to wane. 2007 would renovate the Nika into a brand new set of Toa. Even though it's still the same characters, they were very different visually, adding a more underwater aesthetic to Bionicle that wasn't seen in previous years, which was definitely a welcome addition as well. And you know, this year would also be a pretty good year for Bionicle, all things considered. However, as mentioned previously, public interest was still waning, even if this wasn't an objectively bad year for the series. Potentially seeing this decline in interest in Bionicle, LEGO decided to bring back the OGs, bringing back the original Toa in a brand new form, introducing Tahu, Gali, Pohatu, Anua, Lua, and Kopaka back to the scene once more, for the first time since 2002. Now, these guys were admittedly very, very different from their original versions, with Tahu being basically unrecognizable. Same with the rest of them. I mean, they're all very, very unrecognizable from their original versions and are basically their original versions in name alone. But this year still wasn't the worst year for Bionicle. There were still some pretty cool sets, and we also saw the return of Takanuva, which was pretty sick, along with some pretty neat looking Matoran and Makuta returning as well. However, it was very clear that despite these guys being the Toa that we all know and love by name, it didn't really do anything to bring back public perception of Bionicle and make it popular once more. And because of this, going into 2009, LEGO had to do something to keep Bionicle back on top. Because with Bionicle's interest waning, there was little time left to prove that the theme could continue and could go into the 2010s and still be a profitable success for the company. And to do this, they decided to completely renovate basically everything that Bionicle was. This renovation would come with the Gladiatorian wave of Bionicle in 2009. This would completely add a new cast of characters, including Matanui becoming an actual physical guy, a brand new movie to coincide with this wave, and a whole new set and system of guys. Now, I'm not here to stress on Gladiatorian Legends because I don't think a lot of these are that bad. We did get some pretty cool innovations in Bionicle tech at this time, like they have fingers now. They have fingers. They're not just a nub hand. That's pretty cool, right? But other than that, cool innovation and some pretty cool part usage. For a lot of people, this was just Bionicle in name alone. And even though I do like some of these sets, I do understand where they're coming from. Because with this whole switch up and change in Bionicle, I could see why a lot of people kind of lost interest. Plus, the movie was crap. It was really bad. I made an entire video talking about the lore side, movie and TV show side of Bionicle, but I just wanted to mention that movie is really, really bad. And with 2009 not really bringing that much success for Bionicle, if any, they decided that Bionicle was no longer profitable and it was time to cut their losses. Going into 2010 would be the final year of G1 Bionicle. Now, unlike a lot of LEGO games that just end abruptly, Bionicle, for how influential and important it was to get LEGO back on their feet, it was only necessary that LEGO Bionicle got a send-off. In 2010, they remade a lot of their old sets in a brand new style and updated them to modern LEGO Bionicle standards as an official send-off for Bionicle. This wave would be Bionicle Stars, which would include 6 remakes of older Bionicle sets, and yeah, they're pretty bad. Now, I don't hate Bionicle Stars by any means, but I think they're pretty rough. I don't even think the sets themselves are that bad, like, quality-wise. Yeah, I think some of the sauce is lost in some of the designs for a lot of these older characters, but some are pretty good. I just think mostly the choices for what characters were included here were pretty rough. Like, sure, Tahu needed to be here, 100%. Tahu is the Bionicle for most people. He needed to be here. Takanuva also, yeah, definitely, he needed to be here. I would have liked if he had his gold mask, but you know, whatever. He's still cool. He definitely needed to be here. Hell, even the Roxy, like, even though it's just a generic yellow Roxy, I think, yeah, sure, I mean, the OG Roxy are some of the best Bionicle sets they ever made, so yeah, of course they would have them here. However, the other 3 are a little weird. 2 of the 6 remakes of Bionicle that were supposed to celebrate the entirety of Bionicle were from the Gladiatorian Legends subsystem that just ended last year, with Skrull and Gress being remade here. Which, like, who are you people? Why are you 2 here? These guys were literally on store shelves last year. Why did they need a modern remake? And considering how significantly worse they were compared to the original versions, it just felt like a complete waste of space when Vakama could have been here. Like, Vakama really needed to be here, and it's really upsetting that he wasn't. You could even put, like, Makuta here, although Makuta's a bit bigger, it would have been harder to put him in this style. So maybe just, like, put Jollar or something. Like, there were so many other options here as well. And the Paraka was a cool idea to, you know, bring a Paraka to this theme. I think the Paraka are cool enough that they did need to be here. However, which Paraka is this? It's just a Paraka. It's not any of the Paraka like Hakan or Sork. It's just a Paraka. John Paraka is here. Like, why? Safe to say, for many fans, this was quite the disappointment, including for me. And this would be the note that Bionicle would end on. At least for now. However, news would come in 2014 of Bionicle G2, a complete remake of Bionicle, completely remaking and reinventing Bionicle as we know it. Now, this brought a lot of hype for a lot of people. Even though Bionicle was pretty dead for the most part, like, let's be honest, in public perception, Bionicle was very dead. However, there were still a lot of people who were yearning for more Bionicle. They wanted more Bionicle. And G2 was the reboot that a lot of people were hoping for Bionicle, to reel it back in, bring it back on track, and introduce it to an entire new generation of people. With the marketing campaign starting up in 2014, controversy already arose as the Toa looked pretty different and were very differently made. And with the sets officially releasing in 2015, the opinions of most people were mostly negative. Now, don't get me wrong, G2 still had a lot of fans. However, it really, for a lot of older Bionicle fans, was pretty rough for the most part. For this video, I bought some Bionicle G2 sets from 2015 to see if they were really either bad or good, or if they were just mediocre. For this video, I decided to pick up Lua, Master of the Jungle, as the OG Bionicles were remade and ported into this new style. And this new style is extremely different from older Bionicle sets. It is a more heavily armored version of your usual Bionicle, with a lot of new pieces, and more closely resembled the Star Wars buildable figures. Comparing it to Obi-Wan Kenobi here, yeah, you can see that the building techniques and the way these guys are constructed is pretty much the exact same. They were basically Star Wars buildable figures at this point. And for a lot of people, that was a little bit of a rough oopsie, because a lot of the style and sauce of OG Bionicle was a little bit lost here. And I can see that. I do understand that thought process. However, I don't think they look bad by any means at all. I actually think they look pretty cool. The yellow and green color scheme works pretty well. The mask is a departure from the OG mask, which I think is the best interpretation of Lua. However, it is still pretty good and gives me some Nuva vibes almost. My only issue with that assembly up there is that it's pretty hard to actually move the mask without knocking stuff over, or like breaking something, or accidentally disassembling something, or knocking the mask off. Because the mask is only connected via surface tension, I'm pretty sure, it's not actually connected via anything, so it's pretty easy to knock off. And that is the point. The point is you are able to have the mask go flying off the face. It is a intentional play feature. However, I think it just makes it more annoying than anything. Lua also includes a optional gold mask you can throw on, which is pretty cool as well. Oh look, they even included the OG gear play feature to move the arms. That's pretty cool. I like that quite a lot. Very nice, like, OG play feature that they included here. I'm very happy they didn't just cut that. The set also included this little spider skull thing that you can act as another Bionicle mask, which is a pretty cool looking mask, don't get me wrong. However, this spider is from a different set, because the one I got in this set, basically all the clips were just broken on the little legs. That happened a lot, especially with these little leg pieces. I'm pretty sure that's actually why they're retired now. I don't think they make these pieces anymore. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure they don't make those pieces anymore because the clips would just break so often. Overall, I don't think this is a bad interpretation of Lua at all. It is definitely a more modernized version, and comparing it to OG Mata Lua from 2001, yeah, we have definitely changed quite a bit in the past decade. However, I don't think it's a bad change. This is definitely a lot more of a posable figure, a lot more of a modernized take on Bionicle, which I think has a place, you know. I don't think this is absolutely atrocious. I don't think it looks bad at all. It's a pretty good set. Now, the same can't be said for all of the Toa. I think some of them are a little ugly. I don't know what they did to my boy Anua. He looks weird. Pohatu is the best out of all of these. Same with Tahu, actually. Pohatu and Tahu are very reminiscent of their original versions and take their original versions into account quite a bit. Kopaka looks maybe a little too armored. He looks pretty bulky for what he's supposed to be. And Gali, I don't know, Gali just looks ugly. No offense, Gali, but this is probably my least favorite version of Gali they've ever made. Along with this, we got some other hero Bionicles. with the Protectors. Now, the Protectors are basically the replacement for the Matoran, which I don't think we needed to replace the Matoran, to be quite honest. Like, the Matoran are fine, you could have just called them the Matoran. I got the Protector of Jungle to go along with Lua, and he's pretty cool. Unlike Lua, he has a bunch of translucent green armor pieces all over him, and his mask is brand new with a solid green fading into this translucent green with a little bit of marbling in there. It's actually a very nice, well done mask piece. It comes with another little spider guy and a almost crossbow looking 6-stud shooter, which is a very awesome weapon. I'm gonna be honest, that's a great little weapon. However, aesthetically, I'm not a big fan of the Protectors. Some of them do look cool. The Protector of Earth also looks good, and I think the masks overall are nice, but it lacks that diversity that the Matoran had, because each of the Matoran looked unique in their, at least in their masks, you know? You could tell each Matoran apart more than just their color. You know, they had different masks, they had different armor, they had different pieces that comprised them. So you didn't all just look like reskins of the same guy, which, sadly, pretty much all of the Protectors do look like reskins. Even the Mask Maker, which is supposed to be a special, you know, Protector, he's just the same, but he's got a shield and a hammer now, and he's gold. You know, like, I would have liked for the Mask Maker to be a different aesthetic or to be a different looking guy. And the villains of the wave are cool. Skull Grinder is my favorite. He looks like Surtur, like he's actually just straight up Surtur. However, all of the other ones are a little just generic bad guys. They don't really have the sauce that the Raxi or Paraka had. They look a little too much like generic bad guys. Because, you know, even though the Paraka were absolutely terrifying, the Raxi were very nimble, very elegant. They looked like assassins almost. These guys just look like skull put on guy. They look like a metal album cover. This aesthetic, I guess it looks fine. You know, it's a children's toy, it's not the end of the world. But I do prefer pretty much all the villains from Bionicle's past, especially towards the end where they got really weird and wacky with it, like with the underwater goobers. Like, those are so creative and interesting. The Lord of the Skull Spiders is a pretty cool set. I do love that guy. I think he looks pretty sick. But all of the other ones are just a little lame. So while I do understand some of the criticisms of G2, and I think the first wave of G2 did have quite a few issues, I do think there is potential here, and I don't think the idea of just making Bionicle modernized was actually that bad. You know, they didn't fully betray what Bionicle used to be, and I think they could coexist with OG Bionicle. However, it was evident that this really wasn't gonna last, with 2016, the very next year, being the final year for LEGO Bionicle. Which, yeah, I guess the reception really wasn't that good. Safe to say that 2015 really failed to bring in the new audience and just alienated a lot of their old audience, which just sucked. However, we do still have that final year of Bionicle to talk about, and oh boy is it something. You know how I said that 2015 didn't entirely betray the aesthetic of Bionicle? You know, there were some things like the villains that I didn't think were very good, but you know, it was still Bionicle at its core. This does not feel like Bionicle. 2016 were introduced the Toa Uniters, bringing all of the Toa we know and love into their Uniter form. And oh my god, what am I looking at? Yeah, no, they've officially gone too crazy. They went too goofy. Now, I don't hate some of these designs. Tahu admittedly looks sick. Pohatu still looks pretty good, and Kopaka, low-key, isn't that bad. I don't know why Kopaka specifically is bundled with a bird, but you know what, go for it. It's when we get into the other ones that we start getting a little goofy. I think the big issue here is that they use too much translucent pieces. You know, in the last wave, those translucent pieces worked with the protectors because they added on and gave the protectors a more unique design than the Toa and made them feel unique from the Toa, and I loved them for that. However, here, every single piece on these guys is in some way translucent. Especially the villains, like, what am I looking at? Oh my god. Dude, some of these guys just look so, like, goofy. I can't tell what's even happening with some of these guys. They look so over-designed. What happened to the mask maker? Why is he blue? Why are you blue? Like, you went from primarily gold with a blue accent to trans blue with gold shoulder pads and boots. Like, sure, those are some drippy boots, but why is he all gold? And the creatures. No, I'm not just saying that these guys look like generic creatures, because they do. I'm talking about the birds, because that's what they're genuinely called. They're called creatures. The creature of fire. You couldn't, you know, like, come up with a more creative name, like Paraka or Raxi. Nah, let's just call them creatures now. Oh, and while we're at it, let's call the villains beasts, because Lava Beast, Storm Beast, and Quake Beast are all very unique and different guys. You know, if, like, I keep bringing up the Paraka, but I do think they're kind of the gold standard for Bionicle villains. You know, they're all different guys, like Hakan and Sork, and they all had different, like, personalities, and, you know, if you looked into the lore, you could see that these are all different guys. However, here, these are all the same guy. Even when you bring, like, Rutaka into the mix, like, his lore is pretty cool. Here, what is the lore behind these guys? What is Lava Beast's deal? I want to know, because even though, like, you could say that this is just a toy for kids, I think even for kids, having that story and having that differentiation of these characters really helped kids with their imagination to come up with different stories for these guys and build upon that with their own imagination. And you could still make some stories for the Lava Beast, don't get me wrong. I just think that it is a more, I don't want to say lazy attempt, but it is definitely a less cool option compared to what we got before. Circling back to the creatures, they're just really generic. They're even more generic than the protectors. They are genuinely just basically a one-to-one color swap. They're just pretty lame, and I don't even know what they're bundled with. It looks like something out of the Lego movie. It looks like one of Lord Business's bots. Like, what is that? Suffice to say, I don't really like the Uniters. And this wave was hilariously small and marked the permanent death of Lego Bionicle. And that is really sad, because I do genuinely think G2 had potential. G2 Bionicle was meant to reinvigorate interest in Bionicle. However, they kinda lost what made Bionicle good in the first place. Even though not all of the sets were bad per se, a lot of Bionicle's identity was lost in the cracks, and I think that was a big factor. Bionicle was a baseline that you could take and build off of. And a lot of that sauce, a lot of the creativity that went into the OG Bionicle waves really wasn't seen much here. And I feel like giving up really after wave 1 and wave 2, just kind of filling it in, at least I'm pretty sure that's what they did. They just filled it in to get another wave out of here, because usually they decide on canceling a wave seem like pretty soon. I feel like they really could have put a little bit more effort, and maybe in a different universe Bionicle would have lived longer. However, maybe that's a good thing. With LEGO's pricing nowadays, low-key it's probably a good idea that Bionicle stays back in the past. I do not want a reality where we have to pay $40 for a Toa, okay? That is just a bad timeline. Bad timeline. No, absolutely not. Keep Bionicle as far away from possible as modern LEGO as you can, okay? Those should not connect ever. However, with 2016, Bionicle would officially meet its end, and the announcement would come that LEGO Bionicle would officially be cancelled. And there were some people who were sad about it. However, most people just kind of expected this, or were overjoyed and dancing with glory that Bionicle was officially dead. You know, I wouldn't go that far, but I don't hate G2 that much, but you know, I do think that there was a bit of potential lost here. However, maybe it was for the best that Bionicle was left in this era. A lot of people have brought up the idea of a G3 for Bionicle and bringing it back in the GWP style of brick-built guys. Now, I had a whole section in my last video talking about G3 of Bionicle, so I'll go refer you to that hour-long video, and you can go watch some of the interviews I did with some other LEGO content creators over that. However, my thoughts are pretty much no. Again, modern LEGO is just not suited for Bionicle, I don't think. And I think if G2 was betraying the core foundation of Bionicle, a G3 in a brick-built style in the GWP style would limit them so heavily. Like, how would they make Parakas? How would they make the Roxy in that style? A lot of the articulation and the sauce of these guys would be kind of lost in translation. The only thing I could see is some, like, bigger brick-built collector sets for, like, adults. But even then, would anyone buy that? Like, I don't know. I think keeping it as, like, just Easter eggs and the occasional GWP, it would be pretty cool. I would be lying if I said I wouldn't want to talk a Nuva GWP. Like, that would go hard. I just think Bionicle has really had its time in the light, and we should learn from G2 that maybe bringing back Bionicle isn't really possible. I mean, LEGO's already moved away from these Technic-style brick-built figures anyway. They've moved more into these bigger, buildable, brick-built guys like R2-D2, C-3PO, K2SO, Optimus Prime, Soundwave, you know. Those are all, like, the next generation of buildable guys. The OG Technic style of brick-built figures is very much lost. So, yeah, that is the sad downfall and the end of LEGO Bionicle. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Now, let me take you to the outro. Thank you all so much for watching this video. This is one I have had in the works for quite some time. I have been wanting to make a video on Bionicle G2 for a while, and I'm glad I finally was able to, because I think this is a pretty interesting topic. I do see that you guys do seem to love my Bionicle videos. My last one on the Bionicle playsets, you know, started getting views out of nowhere. So I want to thank you all for watching that video on the Bionicle playsets, because that is a very cool video, and I'm glad you all loved that because it's a pretty cool topic. I don't know if there's anything else I could really talk about with Bionicle. The only other topic I could think of that I haven't covered is the comics. So if you guys want to see a full review of, like, the Bionicle comics and you want me to read some of those for a video, I would be happy to. Although I do want to branch out and do some videos on some other buildable figures. Like, I mentioned the Star Wars buildable figures here. I think that can make a pretty good video. Hero Factory is also one I want to get into. I am not very familiar with Hero Factory at all, so if you guys would like to see a video on Hero Factory, I would be more than glad to do that. Let me know in the comments if you want to see any of that, and thank you all so much for watching, as always. See you all next time. Bye-bye.